Thank you all for being here for the Counselor's Webcast for 2017. Everything that we are going to be discussing today is going to be referencing the 2015 to 2017 chapter bylaws. You'll know that you're looking at the correct version of the bylaws by looking in the upper left-hand corner of your bylaws template. It should say 2015 to 2017 biennium on it. The 2017 to 2019 chapter bylaws will be available to chapters in early 2018. There will be webcasts that will discuss any changes that were voted on by chapter delegates at convention that may impact some of the areas of your role. But just to know, for the purposes of this presentation, we are talking about 2015 to 2017 chapter bylaws. One thing that we like to do at the beginning of these presentations is talk about the chapter leadership overall, who is required for the chapter to have on their board and some of the other chapter leader positions, and kind of how everybody works together, what everybody is specifically responsible for, so that you can see how you fit into the overall scheme of things as a chapter counselor. So we're actually going to start with the board of directors that you see here on the screen. Besides the president-elect position, all of these are required board of directors members. So that includes the president, vice president, treasurer, counselor, and secretary. The bylaws also indicates that each of these individuals needs to be an active, meaning dues-paying member of STTI and your chapter. They all must be elected by ballot, and then these are your voting leaders, referred to as officers in your chapter bylaws. So whenever we talk about an officer vote or the officers of the chapter, we're talking about these 5 or 6 individuals that you see here on the screen. Some general responsibilities that are expected or required of everybody are to participate in business meetings, chapter activities, and communications, to submit reports at each board meeting related to position-specific functions, so to give everybody an idea of what you've worked on since the last meeting. And then to prepare the office for transition at the end of each term so that the incoming counselor, the incoming treasurer, feels comfortable in their role and what they are expected to complete. To tell you a little bit more about what the president is tasked with, first and foremost, they are the chief representative of the chapter. So if there is an issue, this would likely be the main point of contact that whomever headquarters would be reaching out to. They are responsible for administering the business of the chapter, which includes the annual business meeting, as well as any board of directors meetings. By virtue of the position, they do serve as a member of committees, with the exception of the Leadership Succession Committee, which they are not allowed to serve on officially or unofficially. And then the president will ensure that there are a number of required reports each year and that they are actually submitted. So even if the president isn't the person making those submissions, they will follow up with the appropriate individuals to make sure that it has occurred. As we mentioned, the president-elect is an optional position, but your bylaws do give you the authority to have that position as part of your board of directors, with their sole responsibility being to shadow the president for 1 to 2 years. So really, they're just becoming comfortable with what it takes to become president. When the president's term ends, they then succeed into the role of president. And because their really just tasked with shadowing the president. Some chapters might have this person fulfill some other responsibilities, so maybe helping to collect award or report answers or serving on a specific committee or some tasks that can really help them become familiar with the chapter and the members so that when they become president, they have a better idea of what is going to be expected of them as well as their membership. Now, the vice president is tasked with performing the president's duties in that person's absence. That does include if the president vacates their role. So even if you have a president-elect, that's all based on terms. Whereas the vice president, if for some reason the president has to step down 3 months early, the vice president would become president for those 3 months, at which time there would either be an election for a new president or the president-elect would step into the president's position. The vice president is also tasked, according to the bylaws, with overseeing the planning of at least 2 chapter events or programs each year. That is a bylaws requirement. They often will serve as a committee chair as needed. And although it's not required, there are at-large chapters who decide to have a vice president for each school because then they can make sure that the programs and events that are planned meet the needs of all of their members at each location. The treasurer is obviously responsible for the chapter funds, which includes preparing an annual budget, developing fiscal policies and procedures. They should be presenting current financials to the board at each meeting so everybody knows the status of the chapter funds. And then they'll actually be responsible for completing a number of reports, the financial section of the annual report, verification of fees, and the IRS Form 990 for chapters in the United States. So obviously we're here today to talk about the counselor's position. So I'll leave this up here on the screen, but after we go over kind of everybody's role, we're going to be diving in deeper into each of these to make sure that everybody is comfortable, to make sure you know where all of the resources are located. We do have several new resources that we wanted to tell you about and make sure that everyone is comfortable with the counselor's position and what's available to you. And then our last board member is the secretary, who is responsible for recording and distributing meeting minutes for each board meeting. They keep official records of chapter activities. They prepare and distribute correspondence to members, and they should be updating the officer and committee chair report after an election so that we know at headquarters who is serving as a chapter leader and that you get the resources that you need for your role. So we talked about the voting officers. That's our board of directors up at the top of the screen. Just to give you an overview of what else your bylaws requires, on the very left-hand side, you'll see that there are 2 required standing committees. The governance committee, who is responsible for bylaws, and the leadership succession committee, who manages the election process as well as developing leaders so that there are people to run on the ballot. You're also required at any given point during a biennium to have delegates, either for convention, which we need right now. These convention delegates are tasked with attending the in-person House of Delegates sessions at the biennial convention. Those always happen the last 2 days of the convention. And then periodically we'll ask for electronic delegates. So those aren't necessary right now because there's nothing to vote on electronically. But as those instances occur, the chapter will be tasked with appointing 2 individuals to vote electronically. The nice thing is that the bylaws also allow for you to either elect or appoint optional leaders. So you don't have to include who they are in your bylaws because they're already accounted for, and they're not voting officers, but they're there to help the committees and the board to achieve their goals. So if the secretary really needs help with communicating to members, they might put together a publicity committee, or they might look for a newsletter editor or a webmaster. Maybe the vice president wants to appoint a program planning committee to help plan those events and programs for members each year. So that's just a basic overview of how the counselor fits in with the rest of the leadership. Now we have the rest of our time to talk specifically about the counselor's responsibilities as well as those resources that we mentioned. And we want to make sure that you have the most current information that is available to you. There have been some recent changes, so we do expect everyone to attend or watch these presentations every single year as the information does change. So just starting out, the counselor should serve as a resource for recruitment. Not to say that you're responsible for recruitment, but because after members are recruited, they will be inducted, you will be a good resource for those leaders who are helping in that capacity. So that means asking, how are candidates learning about your chapter before they are eligible? We don't want your invitation to be the first time any of these people have heard of the organization or have heard from your chapter. There should already be an established relationship so that when you issue that invitation to candidates, they know who you are, they know what to expect, and they're excited to accept that invitation. So this might mean that the chapter puts together some recruitment events for students and nurse leaders, visiting with high school or early college students, putting together some sort of program in the community for Nurses Week to get yourself publicized and integrated with community members who may become eligible in the future. We need to ask who at the chapter is managing that process. So even if you as counselor want to address that at your next board meeting, because whoever handles recruitment is going to eventually make your role easier, because then you won't have to work so hard to communicate what it means to be a member of the organization, because again, then you can just issue the invitations and they should already know who you are. If the chapter does need resources, we do have the Society Pride and Awareness Recruitment Kit, also called Spark, that has a whole guide about recruitment. It has posters and things that you can use for publicity and getting the word out, so that can be downloaded by the individual or individuals who is responsible for recruitment at your chapter. So you'll have a relationship with people who aren't eligible. They might not ever be eligible. So once it comes time for you to step in for your role, one of the first things that you'll be doing is identifying eligible candidates. So the bylaws account for candidates in 3 areas: students in a basic program, which is defined as that undergraduate or equivalent, students in graduate programs, and nurse leaders. Hopefully this criteria isn't new for you to see. This is the undergraduate student criteria. Your candidates do need to have a 3.0 GPA, that is cumulative, in order to meet the expectation of academic excellence. They should be ranked in the top 35% of the class. They need to have completed at least half of the nursing curriculum as defined by your university. They need to meet the expectation of academic integrity. That's also something that your university can define. So if your university says this person is in trouble for cheating and action is being taken against them, then that would count as something with academic integrity. So looking to your university as a resource for that. Just to point out, if you have an RN to BSN program, those students do follow the same criteria as listed in the first 4 bullets. And additionally, they must also have completed 12 credit hours at the current program. For our graduate students, in order to be eligible to be invited, they need to have a 3.5 cumulative GPA, so that's a little bit higher than our undergraduates, and they need to have completed 1/4 or 25% of the nursing curriculum, as well as meeting the expectation of academic integrity. Now, our graduate students have a little asterisk because if they meet the nurse leader criteria, then they can be inducted at any time. So the thought is if you have someone who would qualify as a nurse leader candidate today, but tomorrow they go back to school and they don't have to wait to complete 25% of the nursing curriculum because we don't want to punish them for going back to school had they been eligible the day before. So if you have your graduate program candidates, there may be several of them who are eligible as nurse leaders, and we'll talk about that nurse leader criteria here in just a minute. Now, when we're talking about students, a lot of times we'll hear from chapters who say, you know, our university has a tough course load. We have students approaching us wondering how they can be inducted, even though they missed one of the criteria to be invited, and we just feel awful because we know this is a good candidate, but they were just shy of meeting some of the criteria, and we really wish we could just make an exception so that we can invite these additional people. If you feel like that is something that applies to you, and we do hear from a lot of chapters who feel this way, we do have a solution for you. So for your undergraduate and graduate students, because that criteria is so stringent, we do have exception guidelines available for the chapter to use to invite additional students to join your chapter. This decision to apply is determined by the governance committee according to the bylaws. So you are a member of the governance committee, so that is something that you can bring up as counselor. The purpose is to extend membership to additional students who want to become members but otherwise would not be eligible. So you could not use these to further restrict the criteria. So if you were to apply one of these and it actually means that 10 people get pulled off of the list, then you would not be using the exception clause. This is only to allow you to invite additional individuals. They do need to be documented and considered for future inductions. We know that students talk to each other, so if you apply an exception clause this year, just be prepared and ready to use one next year, because maybe my sister, I know her GPA wasn't as good as mine. Why did she get an invitation and I didn't? So just be prepared to continually use those and document how they were used, so that if a student does question how someone else received an invitation but they have not, you're able to point to, okay, in this particular instance we used the exception clauses. Almost all of the exceptions allow you to invite an additional 10%. So if you're inviting 100 people, that would mean you could use an exception to invite an additional 10, with the exception of the high academic achievement for undergraduate students. So I'll walk through these exceptions for undergraduates first. So again, you would take one of these and apply it to your induction. Your first option is academic achievement. Maybe you found that you have at your chapter and within your program a high number of people who transfer in from another university, and their cumulative GPA isn't a 3.0, but they have a really great nursing major GPA of 3.0 or higher. So you could say, you know what, I think we need to use the academic achievement exception to invite an additional 10% of individuals whose nursing GPA is higher than a 3.0. The one that is becoming more and more common because of our high achieving cohorts that we have is this number 2, high academic achievement. If your top 35% has a cumulative GPA that is much higher than that 3.0 minimum, you actually would be allowed to invite everyone with a GPA of 3.5 or above. So again, you do still need to check your top 35% to make sure that they are a high achieving cohort. So if your top 35% has a GPA of 3.2, then you wouldn't be able to use this because it would be further restricting the number invited. So you have to check your top 35%. What we're seeing is more and more programs are having their top 35% with a GPA of 3.8 or 3.9, sometimes even a 4.0, because they are a high achieving cohort. And so allowing everyone with the 3.5 or above would actually allow them to invite several more students. In this instance, because you're inviting everyone with a 3.5 or above, the 10% limit is waived. The class rank exception allows you to invite additional 10% of people who fall just below the top 35%. So again, if maybe they're not a high achieving cohort, but you know you have some good candidates in between that 3.0 and where your top 35% is cut off, and you'd like to invite some additional people, then you could use this particular clause. And then the final exception is called curriculum. So maybe the way that your university nursing program is structured, you're discovering that you have a lot of people who are juniors who are just shy of completing that 50% of the curriculum, and you'd really like to induct them as a junior so that they have their whole senior year to really get involved with the chapter. So you might decide, we're going to apply this particular clause to invite an additional 10% who are just a few credits shy of meeting that 50% minimum. For graduate students, you also have two options. We don't see as many chapters use the exception clauses for graduates. It doesn't seem to have as much of an impact or be as necessary, especially because you can induct graduates who meet the nurse leader criteria. But again, it all comes down to your program and what you're finding as counselor when you're looking at those who are eligible and those who are approaching you who want to join but aren't quite eligible. The first is called academic achievement. If they have a cumulative GPA slightly below 3.5, you can invite an additional 10%. The second option is called curriculum, where you can invite an additional 10% of graduate students if they're just lacking a few credits of completing that 1/4 of the nursing curriculum. And just pausing to make sure we don't have any questions before we continue talking about nurse leaders. So we have our undergraduate and our graduate students, and we have exceptions to invite additional individuals. And then we also have our nurse leaders. This has been altered slightly as of July 1st. You still need to have a minimum of a baccalaureate degree in any field. There's a lot of questions around that. The baccalaureate degree can be in any field. It does not have to be in nursing. Nurse leader candidates should also be recognized to practice nursing in their country, and then demonstrate achievement in nursing in one of the following categories. So it's these categories that have changed as of 1 July. And they are now scholarship, leadership, service, or practice. So we also have some examples of these achievement in nursing categories, but again, this isn't going to be all inclusive. Your chapter might come across some additional examples that you can document. For scholarship, this might include receiving a research grant, conducting research and disseminating findings, mentoring junior nurse researchers. For leadership, this could include mentoring others to help prepare them for leadership positions, being recognized by an organization for providing exemplary leadership in a specific project. For service or practice, working with an organization that does global outreach or developing a nurse residency program. And we do have additional examples available, which is one of the new resources that we are going to be showing you in the All Chapter Officers Work Group. So the actual criteria has not changed. It's just within achievement in nursing, those categories have changed. So they, as a candidate, just need to make sure that they have some sort of achievement in one of these three areas in order to be eligible for your chapter to issue an invitation. Just like students, nurse leaders should be recruited by the chapter. If they don't have a chapter contact, we do have the application on the STTI website that they can submit through headquarters. A lot of chapters will, because they are required to have one annual induction, they will have nurse leaders at that time, but they can be inducted at any time throughout the year. So you don't have to have a certain number of individuals in order to have an induction, and you don't have to have a ceremony in order to have an induction. So if you find a nurse leader candidate who meets the criteria, you could set up an induction with no ceremony in the online induction system and get them inducted next month. So the ceremony component of your induction is not required. It's just the actual issuing of invitations to eligible candidates, both students and nurse leaders, that is required. You can obviously celebrate all of your new nurse leader people who have joined over the year if your chapter does still have an actual ceremony that takes place, or you can recognize them in some other way. So the main point being, if you just had a big ceremony in May and you have 10 nurse leader candidates approach you today, you don't want to tell them that they have to wait until May to be inducted. Let's go ahead and get them inducted now. Just to tell you a little bit more about the process for someone who does apply through the STTI website, again, we only recommend this route for those who don't have a chapter contact because they are sent to the chapter for review. So if they have already approached you, then you can just review their application and move on from there instead of routing them through an extra step that's not required. So headquarters can't actually review any applications. That's all up to the chapter. Again, in this instance, you will have 30 days from the time that the nurse leader says, hey, I'd like to apply for this chapter, and it's sent to you. You will have 30 days to respond. If you approve them, you will let headquarters know and communicate directly with the nurse leader so that you can get an invitation issued to them. If they are declined, your chapter needs to provide that reasoning. So you're basically picking of the criteria, this is the criteria that they did not meet. And then that is provided back to the candidate. So maybe it's just that their CV or resume wasn't complete, or it didn't really specify how they had achievement in nursing, and really all they needed to do is provide additional information. You're welcome to communicate directly with them in those instances to say, hey, I noticed that it doesn't seem like you have achievement in nursing. If you do, could you provide that to me so we can have more information to make a decision? If your chapter does not respond within that 30 days, that candidate is sent to an international review committee for review, and they can then decide to accept or decline that individual. Some overall clarifications when we're talking about candidates. They are not voted on by the board or the membership, especially because a lot of times this is confidential information and you don't want personal grudges or information coming into consideration. So you as counselor determine if they are eligible based on the eligibility criteria to issue them an invitation or not. So you cannot make the criteria more stringent, meaning you can't change it, you can't require additional components. So we don't ask for letters of recommendation or any other documentation. It's just, this is the straightforward criteria. Do they meet it, yes or no? Your chapter is allowed to induct students who attend a university that does not have an STTI chapter. This is meant to be, again, kind of that one-off exception. So if you have a student who they've heard of the organization, they've heard of your chapter, they don't have a chapter at their university, but they really want to become a member, they could then approach you and demonstrate that they have met the criteria through that proper documentation, and your chapter would be allowed to invite them. If there's an instance where you have the whole program, then we would encourage that program to work to start a chapter. So again, this is just meant to allow the chapter to induct 1 or 2 people from that school, not to be responsible for verifying the eligibility of 100 additional students. To talk about the induction process itself, so we know now who is eligible, now we need to get them inducted. The bylaws just require that one induction takes place every single year. You can have as many as you'd like in addition to that one. There is no required number of candidates. So again, if you just have one nurse leader, you can induct that one person. The ceremony component is not required. That's not to say we should never have a ceremony and we should never celebrate. I think that ceremony is very special to candidates, but you don't have to have a ceremony every single time you have an induction. So if the let's if I want to be inducted right away, that's more important to me than attending a ceremony. So just those types of things to keep in mind. All the bylaws require is that the induction take place at least once a year. What that includes for you, so we identify the candidates, we send them an invitation because we know they're eligible and track those responses. So we're communicating with those candidates up through to the point that they become new inductees and planning how we're going to recognize them. So again, whether that's through a ceremony or maybe it's a special meeting, a dinner, recognition in a newsletter, that's all up to the chapter. Before you actually issue the invitation, we do highly recommend that you reach out to eligible candidates and congratulate them and use that email to set the tone and expectations. So again, if there isn't anyone who's responsible for recruitment, you do not want the invitation to be the first time that they hear from you and the first time that they hear about you, because they're going to have a lot of questions and they probably will not accept that invitation. So this email that you're sending out before your invitation can tell them, why is it exciting to be a member of your chapter? What do they have to look forward to if they accept? When can they expect the invitation? So maybe you're sending it out in 2 weeks, maybe you're sending it out next month. What is the cost? That is one that we do hear from candidates of, I wish I had known the cost before I got the invitation. So letting them know what the dues amounts are. If they attend the ceremony, if you're having a ceremony, are you charging a fee for that? And what they're getting for those costs. Maybe it's a meal. And directing them to the website to learn more about non-chapter specific benefits. We do have a sample letter available in the All Chapter Officers Work Group, and again, I'll show you where all of these are located. And it has highlighted areas that all you have to do are fill in your chapter specific information into that area, and it tells them, this is our chapter name, this is when you'll get the invitation, this is how much it costs. Any ceremony details if applicable. There's information about the Edith Anderson membership subsidy. So if they already know that they can't afford those membership fees, they can apply for a subsidy, and just telling them a little bit more about your specific chapter so that they feel prepared, so that when the invitation arrives, it can simply act as an invitation and they know already that they're going to accept and they know what to expect. Once you send that letter, you can then set everything up in the online induction system. This is where you send the initial invitation and any follow-up messages that you want to plan for. You can actually track your candidates' acceptance and payments and generate reports about who's attending and things like that. We do have a new system that was launched last year. You do need to sign up for a training if you're using it for the first time. And I would actually recommend that if it's been several months or even a year since you used it, that you go ahead and attend another training, because we are constantly making changes and updates to the system based on feedback that we hear from you. So if you had an induction in October, November, we've already made changes to the system based on what we've heard from chapters. So it might look completely different if you go to set up an induction for this next October or November. Some suggestions for timeline for your induction. We've already mentioned that you need to have at least one induction each year. Most chapters have no problem having multiple inductions, again, especially if there's not a ceremony associated with it. If you do have a ceremony component for your induction, you want to start your planning earlier, at least 3 months in advance, so that your candidates have time to take off work and invite family members if that's an option, and friends, and know that who is able to make it by your RSVP date. You'll want to upload your candidate list and send the invitation at least 8 weeks before the ceremony. Again, if you're not having a ceremony, some of this is going to be happening much quicker, because you already know, especially with nurse leaders, this person's already interested and wants to be a member right now, so maybe I'll just give them a month to accept. The respond by date is automatically set 2 weeks before the ceremony. You will not be able to make it any sooner than that. That is the default. We need at least 2 weeks to prepare the materials to get it to the individuals on time. And your induction materials will be arriving the week of your ceremony. So again, if you have a ceremony and you have a lot of candidates, we need to print all of their certificates. We need to make sure that we have your induction handouts and things of that nature to you in time for the actual ceremony. And just a reminder that for nurse leaders who apply through STTI, you will have 30 days to review that application. So that was all about just the induction component of being a counselor. One of the other requirements of your position is to serve on the governance committee. The governance committee is responsible for bylaws. Your committee is made of 3 members who can be elected or appointed, and then the 4th is going to be your counselor. So there's at least 4 people on the governance committee. If you are an at-large chapter, you can determine if one or all of the counselors serve on the committee. That's up to you. The responsibilities of the governance committee are to make recommendations for bylaws changes. This due date is for next year. So bylaws, any changes that are going to be made to your chapter bylaws will take place the year following a convention. So since we have convention coming up in October and November, next year, your as governance committee will be submitting any changes or just submitting the bylaws as is based on what chapter delegates vote on. The governance committee also oversees member and chapter eligibility issues. Before I talk about what's new, I have a couple questions that I'm going to respond to. These slides and the webcast, as I mentioned, this is being recorded. This will be available in the All Chapter Officers work group. I have a question, what is an induction without a ceremony? Where do the certificates go? How does STTI know if there's going to be a ceremony? I would recommend that you attend an online induction system training. We do have several coming up. When you are setting up your induction, you select ceremony, no ceremony, in-person ceremony, virtual ceremony, or no ceremony. In the instance where you have no ceremony, all that happens is that person is issued an invitation, they accept and become a member. So there is no event for them to attend. They just become a member. And because it is listed as no ceremony, that individual receives their materials directly to them. Same thing is true in the instance of a virtual ceremony. Those materials are mailed directly to the candidates. So it's all based on what your chapter has set up in the online induction system. Great question. So in those instances, many chapters will choose to recognize that individual in some other way, especially if you've just had a large ceremony. You don't want to wait a year to recognize that person. You don't want to wait a year to induct them. So you might put it in a newsletter on your website, in an email, like welcome this new member who was just inducted via the online induction system. So to tell you a little bit about what's new, Leader Lines is receiving an upgrade. This should be coming with the next issue in August. So this is a monthly newsletter that is sent to every chapter leader based on their position. So it will tell you as counselor, here is your position specific news and information that you need to know. It will include online induction system, trainings and information. In July, we included the changes to the nurse leader application and that information about making sure you're using the correct application and the guidelines that are associated with that. And there are just general reminders, make sure you're using the current induction slides and scripts. There is a new version at least once a year, sometimes more frequently, so reminders to download the new induction scripts and slides. It also still includes important dates and trainings. What's new about this version, it will have chapter-specific alerts and notifications. And it also will have a chapter-specific dashboard with membership numbers. So the chapter can see how many active members, how many inactive members, who's renewing or not renewing, who has transferred in, so that you can reach out to those individuals as needed. And there is also news from your regional coordinator. Another new thing that we have recently launched, you can now add volunteer positions to your website by clicking on settings in the upper right-hand corner and then volunteer opportunities. So if you as counselor need help setting up the next induction ceremony, maybe you want to recruit a couple people to serve as a greeter at the door or to hand out name tags or to prepare the certificates for the candidates. You can set that up as a volunteer position, issue invitations through the system. It's just a really nice way to get some new volunteers. Hopefully they will continue to volunteer, maybe be a chapter leader in the future. And then we can recognize them at headquarters for all of the volunteering they have done for the organization. You can also email your active members through your website now, again, by clicking on settings and then email community members. This is a real-time email that will go out again to all of your active members. If you're familiar with the website, then you know you also have a discussion forum that emails all of your active members. So just to tell you a little bit more about the benefits of each, the email is sent immediately. That is the biggest difference between the two. This is sent in real time. It does allow members to unsubscribe, which means your chapter is compliant with spam laws. No special formatting can be done, so it is just plain text. For that reason, we would really recommend that it be very short and to the point. Information that really the biggest thing is that it needs to go out now. And then replies are sent privately to the chapter leader who sent the message. So if Carol is signed into her chapter website and she clicks on that button, it's going to seem like it came from Carol and all of the replies will come to her. It's much easier than using your Outlook or your personal inbox to send a message. Now with the discussion forum, this is sent based on the subscription. What we automatically set people as an active member is a daily digest, which means it comes at the end of the day. Most people therefore see it the next day. So again, that's why the timing is really the biggest difference. The discussion forum also allows members to unsubscribe. So again, you're good with spam laws. The nice thing about your discussion forum is it does include a formatting toolbar. So if you want it to look nice and bold items or have like a bulleted list, this would be a good option for you. And replies can be posted publicly for all members to join in the conversation. So things that are more conversational or you're asking for input on would be better in the discussion forum because then everyone can have that conversation with each other. I'm going to pull up just a quick poll here. I'm going to launch it on our screen. All you have to do is click right on the bubble that you believe is the correct answer. Where can you find all chapter leader resources? Is it the STTI website, the All Chapter Officers Work Group, or both? Just click directly on the screen here. I'll give you a couple seconds to place your vote. Most people have voted. Again, just click directly on the bubble. I'll give you a couple more seconds before I close out. All right. And 29% of you selected the correct answer, which is the All Chapter Officers Work Group. So in terms of chapter leader resources, those are no longer located on the STTI website. Everything is in this work group. So I'm going to actually open it up now so that we can take a quick tour to show you exactly where you need to be and find all of your resources. I've typed the link into the chat box for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It is thecircle.nursingsociety.org. And again, anything related to being a chapter leader, this is where you're wanting to come. If you click on groups and then my groups from the purple toolbar, you'll see all chapter officers work group right at the top. They are listed alphabetically. One of my first recommendations is to scroll down to the announcements area to see if there's anything new that has been added or anything that applies to you. You will always see the meet one-on-one with STTI staff option. So if you can't make it to an online induction system webcast, but you need to go through the system with somebody, we are happy to meet with you one-on-one. You just pick dates and times that are at least 1 week in the future and submit this form, and you'll be matched up with the appropriate staff person based on the topic that you have selected. You'll also always find a link to the management system, which is where the online induction system is located. So you'll always be able to make your way over to the online induction system from this page. My personal preference is to use these purple tabs near the top of the work group in order to navigate. Anything posted in the discussion forum will go into moderation, where an administrator can approve that particular discussion, or they can reach out to you personally if it's something that's really chapter specific that doesn't really apply to the bigger chapter leader group. The library, which is the third tab, this is where you're going to find the majority of the resources that you need. If you expand the by position resources folder, which is the second one down, you'll see counselor is right up there at the top. So the slides from today's webcast are already posted there under those folder contents. This is also where the video presentation will be posted after we're done recording today. We have the induction script and slides. As I mentioned, this is changed fairly frequently. It was changed probably earlier this year. It will change again because we will have a new president after convention. We do recommend that you download a new set for every ceremony that you have. And there are some additional resources here that would be good for you to browse through. In terms of eligibility and guidelines, we do have resources for just about everything. We have guidelines for evaluating candidates from other schools of nursing that don't have a chapter. We have the exception clauses, that nurse leader application that is effective as of 1 July, and the guidelines that are associated with it. Some recorded webcasts about the membership criteria and things of that nature. Under induction-related samples and templates, there are some that have been provided from chapters, and there are also many from STTI. So if you need that letter to send out before the invitation that we referenced, this is where that can be located. We also have a chapter sent in a certificate example for candidates who accept after your respond by date, because that respond by date determines when the certificates are mailed to you. You might have some people who accept and who want to attend the induction, and you can print something for them that has their name on it so that you can still allow them to attend the ceremony and hand them something, even though they didn't respond in time. Then everything related to the online induction system is in the online induction system folder. So that includes a manual, the template that is used to upload your candidates, and the top 5 tips for the online induction system. That is where the majority of your resources are located, but certainly feel free to browse through the other folders. If you're going to be helping with recruitment, the Spark folder is a great place to start with that. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording.